The space station called Orion Trade Hub was always busy. Ships from many planets arrived every hour, carrying traders, soldiers, workers, and travelers. The long market hall was full of noise, bright lights, and the smell of strange alien food. Different species walked past each other every minute, buying tools, fuel, clothes, and rare items. For most people, it was just another normal day in space. But in one dark corner of the market, something painful was happening. A small alien child stood near a metal wall. She looked weak and tired. Her skin was light blue, and her big silver eyes were full of fear. Her clothes were old and torn, and her small hands were shaking from hunger. The child had not eaten for 2 days. In front of her stood 3 large alien merchants. They were tall, strong, and clearly enjoying themselves. One of them held a piece of bread in his hand. He looked at the starving child and smiled cruelly. "Are you hungry?" he asked slowly. The girl nodded quietly. Her voice was too weak to speak loudly. The merchant laughed and dropped the bread on the dirty metal floor. The other 2 merchants laughed with him. "Well then," he said, pointing at the bread, "go get it." The alien child slowly stepped forward. People nearby noticed what was happening, but no one moved to help her. Many travelers simply looked away. Some felt bad, but fear kept them silent. Those 3 merchants were known troublemakers in the market. Most people did not want to fight them. The child bent down slowly to pick up the bread. But just before her fingers touched it, one of the merchants stepped on it with his heavy boot. The girl froze. The merchants laughed loudly again. "Not so fast," the leader said. "You must ask properly." The child looked down at the floor. Her stomach hurt badly, and she was very tired. Still, she spoke softly. "Please, may I eat?" The merchant smiled in a cruel way. "Louder," he said. The girl tried again, her voice shaking. "Please, I am hungry." The merchant slowly lifted his boot, but before the child could grab the bread, he kicked it across the floor. The bread slid far away across the metal ground. More laughter filled the corner of the market. "Go get it," one merchant said. The small alien child walked slowly across the floor. Her legs were weak, but hunger pushed her forward. The crowd watched silently. Some people felt shame, but still, no one stepped forward. The child finally reached the bread and picked it up carefully. For a moment, hope appeared in her tired eyes. She held the small piece of bread like it was something very precious. But suddenly a calm voice spoke from behind the crowd. "That is enough." The voice was not loud, but it carried across the market. People turned their heads toward the sound. A human man was standing near the entrance of the market aisle. He wore simple work clothes, and his jacket had small oil stains on it. His hands were rough, like someone who worked with machines every day. He looked like an ordinary mechanic from the lower docking levels. Nothing about him looked powerful or important. Yet his eyes were serious as he looked at the merchants. The leader of the merchants frowned. "And who are you?" he asked with annoyance. The human walked slowly closer. The crowd moved aside to let him pass. He stopped a few steps away from the merchants and looked at the alien child. Then he looked back at them. "She is just a child," the human said calmly. The merchants laughed again. "And?" one of them replied. The human pointed toward the bread in the girl's hands. "You forced her to beg for food," he said. The leader of the merchants crossed his arms. "This is none of your business." "Human," he said coldly. The crowd waited, expecting the human to walk away. Most people always did. But the mechanic did something no one expected. He slowly placed his small tool bag on the ground. Then he rolled up the sleeves of his jacket. The merchant stared at him with surprise. "You want trouble over a starving alien?" the leader asked. The human looked directly into his eyes. His voice was quiet but firm. "Yes," he said. The entire market suddenly felt silent. The little alien child looked up at the human with confusion. She did not understand why a stranger would help her. But what no one in that crowd knew was that this moment would soon change everything on the station, because the hungry little alien girl was hiding a secret, and the quiet human mechanic was not as ordinary as he looked, and before this day ended, the whole station would learn both of their true identities, to be continued in Part 2. The market hall stayed silent after the human spoke. Dozens of people watched from a safe distance. No one wanted to be part of what was about to happen. The three alien merchants slowly turned toward the human mechanic. Their smiles were gone now, replaced with anger. The leader stepped forward and looked down at the human. "You made a mistake," he said coldly. "This does not concern you." The human did not move. His eyes stayed calm as he stood between the merchants and the small alien child. Behind him, the little girl held the piece of bread tightly in her hands. She looked confused and afraid. No one had ever protected her before. The leader of the merchants laughed quietly. "You are just a worker," he said. "Do you know who we are?" The human shook his head slightly. "And I do not care," he replied. The crowd whispered softly. People in the market could feel the tension growing. One of the merchants stepped closer and pushed the human's shoulder. "You should leave while you still can," he warned. The human looked at the hand on his shoulder. Then he calmly moved it away. "I said," the human repeated slowly. "That is enough." The leader's face turned dark with anger. "You think you can tell us what to do?" he growled. The human did not answer. He only stood there quietly. The leader suddenly raised his arm and punched the human hard in the face. The crowd gasped. The human stumbled back one step. Blood appeared on his lip. For a moment, everyone thought the fight was over, but the human slowly wiped the blood from his mouth. Then he looked back at the merchants with the same calm eyes. "That was not a good idea," he said quietly. Before anyone could react, the second merchant rushed forward to grab him, but the human moved quickly. He stepped aside and pushed the large alien off balance. The merchant crashed into a metal table nearby. Tools and food containers fell loudly to the ground. The crowd gasped again. The leader shouted with anger and attacked next. He swung his heavy fist toward the human's head, but the mechanic blocked the attack and struck back. The movement was fast and precise. Like someone who had trained for many years, the leader stumbled backward, shocked. The third merchant pulled out a short metal blade. "Now you die," he said angrily. People in the crowd quickly stepped back. No one wanted to be close when weapons appeared. The alien child watched with wide, frightened eyes. She clutched the bread tightly against her chest. The armed merchant rushed toward the human. The blade flashed in the bright market lights, but the human reacted instantly. He grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted it hard. The blade fell to the ground with a loud metallic sound. The merchant cried out in pain. The human kicked the weapon away across the floor. The leader roared with anger and jumped forward again. Now all three merchants attacked together. The fight became fast and chaotic. Tables overturned and goods scattered across the floor. The crowd watched in shock as the human mechanic fought against three larger aliens. He moved quickly and carefully, dodging strikes, blocking punches, and striking back only when needed. But even he could not avoid every attack. One merchant slashed him across the arm with a hidden blade. Another hit him in the ribs with a heavy punch. The human staggered but did not fall. Blood slowly ran down his arm. Still, he stayed standing between the attackers and the small alien girl. The leader noticed this and suddenly smiled cruelly. He looked past the human toward the child. "Maybe we should deal with the little problem first," he said. He suddenly rushed toward the girl. The child froze in fear, unable to move, but the human reacted instantly. He jumped forward and blocked the leader's path. The leader's blade struck the human instead. The weapon cut deeply into his side. The crowd gasped loudly. The human fell to one knee. Blood began to drip onto the metal floor. The alien child stared at him in shock. No one had ever taken a blade for her before. The merchants laughed again, thinking the fight was over. The leader lifted his blade for another strike, but suddenly something strange happened. The alien child slowly stood up. Her silver eyes began to glow softly. A strange, quiet energy filled the air around her. The merchants stopped laughing. The crowd stepped back in confusion, because the weak, starving alien child suddenly looked very different, and what happened next would reveal a secret that no one in the market was prepared to see. To be continued in Part 3. The market was silent after the human fell to one knee. Blood slowly dripped onto the cold metal floor. The three alien merchants smiled. Thinking the fight was finally over, the leader lifted his blade again, ready to strike the human one more time. But suddenly something strange happened. A soft light appeared behind him. At first it was very small, like a weak glow. But in a few seconds it became brighter. The leader slowly turned his head, and what he saw made the smile disappear from his face. The small alien child was standing in the middle of the market aisle. Her silver eyes were glowing like two small stars. The weak and frightened girl from before was gone. Now she stood straight and calm. A strange quiet power filled the air around her. People in the crowd stepped back in fear and confusion. The merchants looked at each other, unsure of what was happening. "What is this?" one of them said nervously. The child raised her small hand slowly. The metal tables and tools around her began to shake. The lights above the market flickered. A low humming sound filled the air. The merchants suddenly looked afraid. That is not possible," the leader whispered. The human mechanic, still kneeling on the floor, looked up at the girl, even through the pain. He noticed the strange energy around her. The child walked forward slowly. Her steps were quiet but confident. The leader tried to speak again. You are just a starving child," he said, though his voice was shaking. The girl stopped a few meters away from him. Then she spoke calmly. "I was hungry," she said. Her voice sounded stronger now, clear and steady. "But I was never helpless." The merchants stared at her in shock. One of them suddenly grabbed his blade and rushed toward her. But before he could reach her, his body suddenly lifted into the air. The invisible force around the girl held him there. The crowd gasped loudly. The merchant struggled and shouted in fear, but he could not move with a small movement of her hand. The girl threw him across the market aisle. He crashed hard into a stack of metal containers. The other two merchants stepped back quickly. Fear now filled their faces. The leader looked at the girl carefully, then his eyes widened with realization. "No, it cannot be," he whispered. "You are one of them." The crowd did not understand his words, but the fear in his voice was clear. The girl looked at him quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I am." The leader slowly dropped his weapon, because he finally understood who she was. Her species was extremely rare. They were known across the galaxy for one terrifying ability. They could control energy and matter with their minds. Many powerful empires feared them. Some even called them living weapons. But almost no one had seen one for many years. The leader looked terrified now. You are from the Arvani bloodline," he said slowly. The girl did not answer. Her glowing eyes were focused on the injured human. She walked past the frightened merchants and stopped beside him. The human looked up at her, still breathing heavily from the wound in his side. "You should run," he told her quietly. "They are dangerous." The girl looked at him with something new in her eyes. It looked like respect. "You stood for me when no one else did," she said softly. "Why?" The human gave a small, tired smile. "Because you were hungry," he replied simply. For a moment the girl said nothing. Then she looked down at the wound in his side. Blood was still flowing slowly. The merchants were now slowly backing away, hoping to escape. But the girl raised her hand again. The market doors suddenly slammed shut with a loud metallic sound. No one could leave now. The leader looked terrified. "You cannot harm us," he said quickly. "The station security will come." The girl turned her glowing eyes toward him. "They will," she said calmly. "And they will want to know why you attacked me." The leader froze. Because if the authorities discovered the truth, the punishment would be severe. The girl then knelt beside the injured human mechanic. She placed her small glowing hand over his wound. A soft light appeared around them. The human felt warmth spreading through his body. The pain slowly began to fade. He looked at her with surprise. "You are healing me," he said quietly. The girl nodded once. "You protected me," she replied. But suddenly loud alarms began to echo through the station. Red warning lights flashed across the market ceiling. The girl looked up in confusion. Something unexpected was happening. And in the next few minutes, the entire station would learn that the mysterious alien child was not just powerful. She was also someone extremely important. Someone that powerful people across the galaxy had been searching for, and now they knew exactly where she was. To be continued in Part 4. Red warning lights flashed across the ceiling of the market hall. A loud alarm echoed through every corridor of the station. The crowd in the market looked around in fear and confusion. No one understood why a full station alert had suddenly started. The 3 alien merchants looked even more terrified now. The leader slowly backed away from the glowing alien girl. "This is bad," he whispered to the others. Across the market, the injured human mechanic slowly stood up. The warm light from the girl's hand had already closed most of his wound. The pain was still there, but he could move again. He looked at the flashing lights above them. "That alarm is not for the market fight," he said quietly. "It is a station security alert." The girl looked at him, confused. "What does that mean?" she asked. The human's face became serious. "It means someone important is coming," he replied. At that moment, a deep mechanical voice spoke through the station speakers. "Attention all citizens," the voice announced. "Emergency lockdown is now active. All travelers must remain where they are. Security teams are moving through the station." The crowd began whispering nervously. Lockdowns did not happen often. When they did, it usually meant something very dangerous was happening. The alien merchants looked at the girl again with fear. The leader suddenly understood the truth. "They found you," he said slowly. The girl frowned slightly. "Who found me?" she asked, but before he could answer, the heavy doors at the end of the market corridor suddenly opened. 6 tall armored soldiers marched inside. Their armor was black and silver, with glowing blue lines across the chest. They carried advanced energy weapons. The crowd quickly moved away from them, creating a wide, empty path. Everyone on the station recognized those uniforms. They were not normal security guards. They were elite Imperial hunters, soldiers trained to track and capture the most dangerous targets in the galaxy. The leader of the merchants quickly raised his hands. "It was not us," he said nervously. "We did nothing." But the soldiers ignored him completely. Their helmets slowly turned toward the alien girl. One of the soldiers stepped forward. His voice came through a cold metal speaker in his helmet. "Target confirmed," he said. "Arvani subject located." The entire market fell silent again. People looked at the small alien girl with shock. Now they understood why the merchants had been afraid. The girl slowly stood up. Her glowing silver eyes looked at the soldiers calmly. "You came very quickly," she said. The human mechanic stepped closer to her side. "You know them?" he asked quietly. The girl nodded once. "They have been hunting me for a long time," she said. The human looked surprised. "Hunting you?" he repeated. The leader of the soldiers spoke again. "Arvani child," he said, "you will come with us peacefully. You are property of the Imperial Research Command." The crowd gasped quietly. Everyone knew what that meant. If the Empire captured someone, especially a rare being like the Arvani, they would use them for experiments and weapons research. The human mechanic frowned. "That sounds more like kidnapping," he said loudly. Several soldiers immediately aimed their weapons at him. "Stay where you are, human," one of them warned. "This does not concern you." The human slowly raised his hand slightly, but he did not step away from the girl. The leader of the hunters looked at him carefully. "You are interfering with an Imperial mission," he said coldly. "That is a serious crime." The human gave a small, tired smile. "Seems like I am having that kind of day," he replied. The alien girl looked at him quietly. "You should leave," she said softly. "They will not stop for you." The human shook his head slowly. "You were starving 5 minutes ago," he said. "I am not walking away now." For a moment the girl looked surprised again. Few people in the galaxy would stand against Imperial hunters. But the mechanic did not move. The leader of the hunters raised his weapon slightly. "This is your final warning," he said. "Step away from the Arvani subject." The girl slowly stepped forward instead. Her silver eyes began glowing brighter again. "I will not go with you," she said calmly. The soldiers immediately aimed their weapons. "Then we will take you by force," the leader replied. Energy weapons began charging with a high electronic sound. The crowd quickly ran for cover behind market stalls and walls. The human mechanic clenched his fists. He knew he could not fight trained soldiers alone, but he also knew something else. The small alien girl beside him was far more powerful than anyone in that market understood, and if the hunters attacked her now, they might discover that capturing an Arvani child was far more dangerous than they imagined, because the quiet glowing energy around her was already beginning to grow stronger. And in just a few seconds, the entire station was about to witness what an Arvani truly could do, to be continued in Part 5. The market hall felt tense and silent. Red warning lights flashed across the metal walls. The Imperial hunters stood in a tight line, their weapons aimed at the small alien girl. Their armor glowed faintly under the bright market lights. People hid behind tables and market stalls, afraid of what was about to happen. In the middle of the wide aisle stood the alien girl and the human mechanic. The girl looked calm, but her silver eyes were shining brighter than before. The human noticed the strange energy building around her. "You do not have to fight them alone," he said quietly. The girl glanced at him for a moment. "You should step back," she replied softly. "This may become dangerous." The human gave a small smile. "It already is," he said. "Last warning," he announced through his helmet speaker. "Surrender now." The girl did not move. Instead, she slowly lifted one small hand. A quiet humming sound began to fill the air again. The soldiers noticed it immediately. "Energy spike detected," one hunter reported. "Prepare containment field," the leader ordered. The crowd gasped in surprise. The energy cage was designed to trap powerful beings. But the girl did not look worried. She simply looked up at the glowing barrier around her. Then she closed her eyes for a moment. The humming sound grew stronger. He asked. The girl opened her glowing eyes again. "Something my mother taught me," she answered quietly. The soldiers stared at their equipment in shock. "Containment field destabilizing," one of them said. The girl slowly raised both of her hands now, and containers rattled loudly. Even the soldiers felt their armor vibrating. The leader shouted orders. "Fire stun weapons now," he commanded. Bright blue energy bolts shot toward the girl. The crowd screamed and ducked for cover, but before the bolts could reach her, and all the frozen energy bolts turned and flew back toward the hunters, the soldiers quickly raised their shields, but the force knocked several of them backward. 2 hunters crashed hard against the metal wall. "Incredible," he said, but the leader of the hunters quickly stood up again. His voice now sounded angry and desperate. "Activate suppression unit," he ordered. One of the soldiers opened a heavy metal case on his back. Inside was a large black device covered with warning lights. The girl noticed it immediately. Her calm expression changed slightly. "That machine?" he asked. The girl's glowing eyes narrowed. "It is designed to stop my kind," she said quietly. The soldier placed the device on the floor and activated it. A deep pulse of dark energy spread across the market. The humming energy around the girl suddenly weakened. She stumbled slightly. The human quickly supported her. "You look weaker," he said. The girl nodded slowly. "That machine blocks my power," she replied. The hunters began moving closer again. Confident now, the leader smiled behind his helmet. "Did you really think we came unprepared?" "Step back or you die," the soldier warned. The human clenched his fists but slowly stepped away. The girl looked at him sadly. "I am sorry," she whispered. The hunters began pulling her toward the exit doors. But suddenly something unexpected happened again. The soldier immediately aimed his weapon at his chest. "I told you to stay back," the hunter growled. The human looked directly at the leader of the hunters. "You made one mistake," he said calmly. The leader tilted his helmet slightly. "And what mistake is that?" he asked. The human smiled faintly. "You think she is the only one with secrets," he replied. The hunters paused in confusion, and before anyone could react, the small tool bag the human had placed on the ground earlier suddenly began to beep loudly. A blinking red light appeared on it. The leader looked down at it in surprise. "What is that?" Several powerful ships had just received that signal, and they were already on their way, to be continued in Part 6.
The small tool bag on the market floor continued to blink with a red light. A soft but steady beeping sound echoed in the silent hall. The Imperial hunters looked down at it with confusion. The leader slowly turned his helmet toward the human mechanic. "What kind of signal did you send?" he asked coldly. The human stood calmly a few steps away. His hands were relaxed, but his eyes were focused. "Just a message to some friends," he replied quietly. The leader laughed through his helmet speaker. "You think someone will come to save you?" He said. "You are on an Imperial station. No one is foolish enough to attack us here." The human gave a small smile. "You might be surprised," he said. The leader ignored him and turned back to the girl. "Take her to the transport ship," he ordered his soldiers. Two hunters began pulling the alien girl toward the market exit. The strange suppression machine still hummed on the floor, weakening the glowing energy around her. She struggled slightly. But her powers were clearly limited now. The human watched them carefully. His calm expression had not changed. Outside the station, far beyond the metal walls, the empty darkness of space suddenly came alive. Three small ships moved quickly through the stars. Their engines glowed with bright blue light. Inside the lead ship, several figures watched a flashing signal on their control screen. One of them spoke urgently. "The signal is confirmed," he said. "It is him." Another figure leaned closer to the screen. "Location: Orion Trade Hub Station," the first man replied. The room became quiet for a moment. Then the captain of the ship stood up slowly. "If he activated the signal," she said firmly, "then he is in serious trouble." The crew quickly began preparing their weapons and engines. "Full speed," the captain ordered. "We reached that station in 3 minutes, back inside the market hall." The hunters were already moving the girl through the exit doors. The human mechanic followed them slowly. A soldier kept his weapon aimed at him the entire time. "You should have stayed out of this," the soldier warned. The human shrugged slightly. "I hear that a lot," he replied. They entered a long metal corridor leading toward the docking area. Station alarms were still echoing through the halls. Travelers and workers watched nervously from behind closed shop doors. The suppression device continued humming as the soldiers carried it with them. The alien girl looked weak but calm. Her glowing eyes slowly turned toward the human. "Who are those friends you called?" she asked softly. The human glanced at her. "People who do not like bullies," he said. The girl looked curious, but before she could ask more, a sudden explosion shook the entire station. The corridor lights flickered wildly. The hunters instantly stopped walking. "What was that?" one soldier shouted. Another explosion followed, louder than the first. The entire station trembled violently. Emergency red lights began flashing even faster now. A new announcement came through the station's speakers. "Warning," the mechanical voice said. "Unauthorized ships approaching the station. Defense systems are under attack." The leader of the hunters froze for a moment. Then he turned sharply toward the human. "You planned this," he said angrily. The human only smiled slightly outside the station windows. 3 fast attack ships suddenly appeared from the darkness. They moved quickly around the station defenses. Bright energy blasts struck the outer security cannons. Station defense systems struggled to respond. Inside the corridor, the hunters looked nervous now. "Enemy ships detected," one soldier reported. "They are requesting docking access." The leader shook his head angrily. "They will not reach us in time," he said. "Move faster." The hunters began dragging the alien girl again toward their transport ship. But the human mechanic suddenly stopped walking. He looked toward a large window at the end of the corridor, through the glass. 3 small ships could now be seen approaching the docking ring. The human smiled again. "Looks like they arrived," he said calmly. The leader of the hunters shouted at his soldiers, "Prepare for combat." But suddenly the corridor doors behind them exploded open. Metal fragments flew across the hallway. Smoke filled the air. Through the smoke stepped several armed figures wearing dark combat armor. Their leader removed her helmet slowly. Her sharp eyes immediately found the human mechanic. "You always pick the worst places to start trouble," she said. The human chuckled quietly. "You came quickly," he replied. The captain looked toward the captured alien girl and the Imperial hunters holding her. Then she smiled in a dangerous way. "Well," she said calmly, "let us fix this situation." The Imperial hunters raised their weapons instantly. The corridor was about to become a battlefield. And the Imperial soldiers were about to learn something very important. The quiet human mechanic they had tried to arrest was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined.
Smoke slowly filled the long metal corridor. The broken doors behind the Imperial hunters sparked with small blue lights. Standing in the doorway were 5 armed fighters wearing dark combat armor. Their weapons were already aimed at the hunters. At their front stood the woman who had removed her helmet. Her sharp eyes moved from the soldiers to the alien girl, and finally to the human mechanic. "You really made a mess this time," she said calmly. The human mechanic smiled a little. "I had help," he replied, nodding toward the small alien girl. The Imperial hunters quickly moved into defensive positions. Their leader stepped forward with his weapon raised. "You are interfering with an Imperial capture mission," he announced loudly. "Surrender immediately," the woman laughed quietly. "You really should check who you are talking to before making threats," she said. One of her soldiers stepped forward and activated a small device on his armor. A blue symbol appeared in the air between them. The Imperial hunters froze when they saw it. Even their leader became silent for a moment. "That symbol," one of the soldiers whispered. The leader's voice suddenly sounded less confident. You are with the Free Alliance," he said slowly. The woman nodded once. "That is correct," she replied. The Free Alliance was not a small group, and they were not afraid of Imperial hunters. The leader of the hunters tried to stay calm. "You cannot take the Arvani child," he said firmly. "She belongs to the Empire." The alien girl finally spoke again. "I belong to no one," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, but strong. She said. The human mechanic nodded. "Yes," he replied. "But I think we can solve that." The Imperial leader suddenly realized something. He looked sharply at the human. "You are not just a mechanic," he said. The human gave a small, tired smile. "No," he answered. "I suppose I am not." Before the hunters could react, the human suddenly moved fast. He kicked the suppression device hard across the floor. The humming sound instantly stopped for 1 second. Nothing happened. Then the alien girl's silver eyes burst into bright, glowing light again. A powerful wave of energy filled the corridor. The Imperial soldiers staggered as the invisible force pushed them backward. Their weapons flew out of their hands and slammed against the walls. The leader tried to stand his ground, but even he was forced back several steps. The girl slowly lifted her hand again. The air around her shimmered with quiet power. "I warned you," she said softly. Metal objects around the hallway began to float in the air. Even the heavy armor of the hunters seemed harder for them to control. The woman from the Free Alliance smiled slightly. "Now that looks more fair," she said. The Imperial leader knew the mission had failed. He slowly raised his empty hands. "This is not over," he warned. "The Empire will hunt you across the entire galaxy." The alien girl looked directly at him. "Then they will continue failing," she replied calmly. A moment later the hunters were disarmed and surrounded by the Alliance fighters. The corridor finally became quiet again. The Alliance captain crossed her arms and looked at him. "You could have handled this alone," she said. "Why call us?" The human looked at the small alien girl standing beside him. "Because she should not have to run forever," he said quietly. The girl looked surprised at those words. "What do you mean?" she asked. The human looked at her seriously. "You are not just powerful," he said. "You are important. Your people disappeared because the Empire feared them. But maybe it is time they stop hiding." The girl thought about his words for a moment. Then she slowly nodded, for the first time since the fight began. She smiled. Outside the station windows, the stars shined quietly in the darkness of space. A new journey was beginning. One where a brave human, a powerful alien child, and a small resistance fleet would stand together, and somewhere far away in the Imperial capital. Leaders were already receiving the terrible news. The Arvani child had escaped again, but this time she was not alone. This time, a human had chosen to stand beside her, and the Empire was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The end.